Raven Software were always very good at taking id Software tech and using it for their own projects. Heretic, Hexen, Soldier of Fortune, and Star Trek Elite Force were all good examples of this. Another of those games was Hexen II, a first-person shooter that was a direct sequel to Hexen, Beyond Heretic, released for Microsoft Windows in 1997 exclusively. Hexen II's story follows the third and final Serpent Rider, Eidolon, presumably after the events of the second game. The Sparrow and Corax are now long gone, and now we focus on a separate set of heroes entirely. Eidolon has engaged the services of the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, who all reign over 4 different continents. As before, you choose from one of several player classes and travel across 4 different hubs as you track Eidolon down and unravel his web of corruption. These locations include a medieval village, an Aztec temple, ancient Egypt and ancient Rome, before a final return trip that ends up back in the same village you started. Hexen II runs on the Quake engine and manages to look as good, if not better, than even Quake itself. The real standout is the Egyptian hub with some fantastic detailed texture work throughout some of the interior pyramid environments, as well as some brilliant particle effects from some of the chapter's enemies. Now, anyone who's played Hexen 1 is going to feel right at home when they play Hexen 2. Quartz flasks, tomes of power, and discs of repulsion all make a return and will be used frequently as you navigate the game's new levels. This time around there are 4 classes to choose from, whereas before there were only 3. Most of these are just replacements for the others. The Paladin replaces the Fighter, the Crusader replaces the Cleric, and the Necromancer replaces the Mage. The only new class is the Assassin, who uses daggers, crossbows, and grenades. Much like the previous game, the differences between each class just come down to what type of weapons you want to use. They've also introduced a leveling system where your base skills increase as you make kills. Though the benefits of leveling up are really incremental and there's no customization over what each new level brings. The only thing that leveling up has any real bearing on is the maximum amount of mana that you can have at any one time. Mana is once again either blue or green, and the first and second weapon use each mana pool respectively. This isn't the type of game where you want to be leaning on the left mouse button, and mana can be pretty scarce at times. You're also on the lookout for the pieces of the 4th weapon, which is now in 2 parts instead of 3. And this, along with the leveling system, is pretty much all the only new additions in the game overall. Hexen II continues the trend of downright sadistic level design, with puzzles and layouts so obtuse and complex that it's hard to imagine people ever finish the single player without a walkthrough. This game really doesn't mess around, and even to accomplish the simplest of tasks, you often have to complete multiple steps to achieve it. It's like the film Inception, you know, puzzle within a puzzle. Take the first hub in the game, for instance. Now, the main objective is to access a chamber underneath the castle where the first horseman takes up residence. To do this, you need to remove the crystal barrier blocking the entryway. To remove the barrier, you have to kill the crystal golem guarding it, but to kill the golem, you have to walk through the magical crystal archway using something called a lens of seeing, made from a glass lens imbued with magical properties from a grindstone hidden atop a fireplace. To create a glass lens, you're going to need to turn some sand into glass using the forge hidden inside the blacksmith's house at the stables after you've visited the secret compartment behind his fireplace, which you know about from a note found at a secret altar, which you can only approach after you found the Amulet of Hunger, which you would have acquired after gaining access to the armory in the palace entrance, using the armory key, of course. The stables are inside the inner courtyard of the palace, but you can't access the inner courtyard in the palace without getting the key, which is kept inside a sunken room in the Barbican, protected by a mithril wall. To remove the mithril wall, you'll need a potion of transmuting, which you can only get once you've grinded down the bones of King Lorik in the mill, whose remains are hidden inside a crypt, which you access by using the hidden switch inside the mausoleum. Hopefully you found the key to the mill by using the crossbow to destroy the crumbling tower after you discovered the secret passage in the Barbican, assuming of course you first gained access to the area by using the catapult to launch yourself over the locked gate. Then it's just a simple matter of knowing that the teleporter to King Lorik's crypt is hidden under the bridge along the path that leads to the windmill and the wizard lab, at which point you can simply grab the remains, grind them at the mill, complete the ritual at your wizard's lab, and Bob's your uncle. And that's just the first area in the game. There's still 4 more to go after that. A lot of time in some of the later hubs, finding secret switches, walls, and passageways is essential to progressing through the game. Sometimes you can notice them because they jut out slightly, or maybe they have some sort of marker on them, but often you're given no hint whatsoever. It's almost like you're expected to just walk around whacking walls until you find one that opens. So let me just say right here and now that if the notion of having to walk back and forth repeatedly between 5 or 6 different maps, all separated by loading screens, while solving puzzles with very little handholding does not sound like your cup of tea, then you should probably stop watching right now, because I doubt I'm going to be able to convince you otherwise. And even in a lot of other ways, Hexen 2 is a much harder game than Hexen 1. Enemies are a lot smarter this time around and will frequently duck and roll to avoid your attacks, and they move a lot faster in terms of movement and attack speed. The The problem, however, is that it all feels a little bit unbalanced. Even the weakest of enemies require large chunks of mana from some of the game's strongest weapons to put down. There's really only 3 or 4 enemy types in the entire game that you'll be seeing over and over again, but they all hit really hard and shrug off attacks like it's nothing. Avoiding the barrage of incoming attacks is damn near impossible, as the majority of environments are cramped interior locations which don't lend themselves to fast movements or circle strafing. Watching the enemies duck, weave and leap all over the place as they dodge your attacks is pretty cool and really innovative for its time, but it seems to be based around a roll of the dice as opposed to whether or not you actually connected with an attack. Quite often you can shoot them when they're in the middle of an animation and you'll see your projectile go right through them because you're in some sort of invulnerable state, where logic and sense obviously have no meaning. You see, when I play a game like Quake, I find that the combat seems to be a lot more polished. When I fire a rocket at someone, it goes exactly where I want it to, and when someone fires something at me, I have a fairly good idea when and where it's going to hit. But with Hexen II, it doesn't feel that way. It's like there's no rhythm or consistency to any of it. There's these panther-looking guys in the second episode of the game that have these roaring animations that last about 4 or 5 seconds, during which time you cannot damage them at all and all your attacks will have no effect. Though there's never any explanation as to why this is, and it's just one of the many little things in this game that drag it all down. Like how the corpses of enemies turn into unpassable roadblocks and have to be gibbed before you can get past them. Or the amount of fucking spiders that you have to kill in this game. I'm not even kidding, this game has to hold some sort of award for total amount of spiders throughout. Despite how I make this all sound, I really don't think this is an outright bad game. It's far from it, but you really have to keep in mind that it is a game with very little player assistance and some downright crushing combat. You will die, a lot. And you'll lose your way and forget what the hell you're supposed to be doing, a lot. But the Hexen series has always kind of been about this style of gameplay. Flipping a switch and not really knowing what it did is something that the first game had down to an art form, and the sequel definitely keeps the same atmosphere and art style across these mechanics. Hexen II is ultimately worth playing for the most part, and chances are that if you're a fan of older shooting games, you've probably played it already. But I would recommend having a walkthrough handy if you do want to check it out, as there are some truly confusing puzzles that are going to stump even the most seasoned of gamers. As it should be, it's cheap to pick up and runs pretty well on modern operating systems with or without a source port.